Lesson 2-3, bar graphs and line graphs. And in this lesson, you learn to construct bar graphs and line graphs. Let's take a look at this example. How do you wake up in the morning? Does someone wake you, or do you use an alarm clock? The results of a survey of how 400 parents with children under 18 wake their children is shown in the frequency table at the right. 172 of the parents call their kids so that they will wake up. 88 use an alarm clock, and 64 wake on their own. Okay, 76 use other methods other than the three. Okay, this is a frequency table, and as what we learned in the last two lessons, frequency table organizes our data for us, so we can better interpret and use the information that's on the frequency table. Another way of organizing and presenting data is what we call a graph. A graph is a more visual representation of data. A bar graph, on the other hand, is used to compare frequency of the amount of category or class. So the first graph that we're going to talk about is a bar graph. It is used to compare the frequency of the amount in a category or class. So in this case, our category will be calling them using an alarm clock or waking on their own. Those are the categories that we want to compare. Okay? And the frequencies are on the right. Let's take a look at how we use that frequency table to be able to create a bar graph. Okay, there are 4 steps, actually 5 steps. Let's go through every single step first, and then we'll look at how to construct a bar graph. Step number 1, draw and label both scales. So step number 1, we label the vertical scale as number of parents and the horizontal scale as the method. Okay, so step number 1, we draw and label both scales. Step number 2, we determine the scale for the vertical axis. Since the vertical axis only has the numbers, we determine the scale. We also choose an interval that best represents the data and mark off equal spaces on the vertical scale. First, let's determine the scale. Since the data includes numbers from 76 to 172, we begin with 0 and end with 180. So the least number is 76. The greatest number is 172. So our scale would be 0 to 180. If you notice later on, okay, most scales, I'm not saying all, most scales will start with 0, okay, and end with the number that will encompass or will be a little bit higher than the highest piece of data. Okay, so most scales will include the 0. Now that we've determined our scale from 0 to 180, okay, let's determine our intervals. Okay, since the vertical scale needs to go from 0 to 180, we use the interval of 20. Remember in 2-2, we talked about intervals. If you are going to choose intervals, it should be from 4 to 7. That would be a good way of choosing the number of intervals. But then again, that is not written in stone. Okay, you can go past 7. You can go a little bit past 7 if it will best represent your group of data. So in this case, by using intervals of 20, we pass 7 intervals, and this is actually 9 intervals. Remember also the definition of an interval. They are all the numbers between any two given numbers. Okay? So we determine the scale 0 to 180 and use intervals of 20. That's for our vertical axis. And there you have it, 0 to 180, intervals of 20 in between. Step number 3, mark off equal spaces on the horizontal axis and label each with a method. So we mark off equal spaces on the horizontal axis and label each method. Call them alarm clock, wake on their own, and other. Step number 4, draw a bar for each method. The height of each bar represents the number of parents that use that method. Okay, so step number 4, going back here, well, we're step number 3 first. That's what we have, step number 3. And step number 4, draw a bar for each method. Okay, the height of each bar represents the number of parents that use that method. So call them is around 162, or sorry, 172. So approximate 172. Parents who use kids who use an alarm clock, 88. So approximate 88 in your bar. Okay, wake on their own would be 64, approximate 64 in the bar. And lastly, 76 for other methods of waking up. Okay, and lastly, okay, this bar graph would not be complete if you don't write a title, and the title is how parents wake up their children. And that's how you create the bar graph in 5 easy steps. Okay, oops, before that, to show data, how data changes over a period of time, you could use a line graph. Again, okay, tells you right away what a line graph is. If you have data that changes over a period of time, you need to use a line graph. Again, the keywords here are period of time. Okay, so if you see time, most probably you need to use a line graph. A line graph is usually used to show the change in direction over change and direction of change over time. Let's take a look at example number 2 and see how this works. Christopher takes a poll to find out how many soft drinks his classmates drink each day. The results are shown at the right. Draw a line graph using the data he collected. So you have a frequency table here, Monday all the way to Sunday. Okay, so in Monday, 27 of his classmates drink soda. Okay, going down the line here on Saturday, 61, and Sunday, 42 of his classmates drink soda. Step number 1, draw and label both scales in step number 1. And here we are, number of soft drinks. Okay, day of the week has been labeled. The vertical axis and the horizontal axis has been labeled. Step number 2, determine the scale for the vertical axis. Okay, so let's determine the scale for the vertical axis. Choose an interval that best represents the data and mark off equal spaces on the vertical scale. Okay, and if we notice, to be able to get the scale, the data includes numbers from 18 to 61. So begin with a scale of 0 and end with 70. Again, you can see here that the scale starts with 0, okay, ends at 70, which is a little bit more than the highest number in our data. Okay, and since we have a scale of 0 to 70, we think of an interval from intervals of 10. Okay, intervals of 10 are good. Why? Because if you use intervals of 10, you have 7 intervals, which would be a good number of intervals. Remember our rule, 4 to 7 intervals or 5 to 7 intervals, whichever you want. Okay, so you now have a scale from 0 to 70 and intervals of 10, and this is how it should look like. 0 to 70 scale, intervals of 10. We have 7 intervals on our vertical axis. Okay, mark off equal spaces, okay, on the horizontal axis. That's step number 3. And label them with days of the week in order. So we basically mark off equal spaces and we put down Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Draw a dot to show the frequency for each day. Draw line segments to connect the dots. Okay, so step number 4, draw a dot to show the frequency for each day. Draw line segments to connect the dots. And this is what we got. So on Monday, there were 27 of his classmates who drank soda. Saturday there were 61, and Sunday there were 42. Draw each dot for each of the days, and then connect each of them, okay, with a line. As you connect each of them with a line, you create your, okay, oops, not that one. You create your line graph, okay? And finally, just like what we did in bar graph, the last step would be label the graph with the title. That's easy enough. Soft drinks consumed in a week. That's our title. And we have created our line graph. Okay? Lessons done. On Google Forms, type a summary of what you've learned by responding to the objective of the lesson. Okay? Type a question you may want to ask in class about this lesson. Thank you.